In the heart of London, near the Grand Buckingham Palace, Corporal James Whittaker stood tall and proud in his crisp ceremonial uniform. The sun gleamed off his polished buttons as he stood perfectly still, guarding one of the palace gates. Tourists from all over the world gathered around him, snapping photos and marveling at his discipline. Some even tried to make him smile by waving or cracking jokes, but Corporal Whittaker didn't budge. He was a picture of focus and dedication. Known for his calm demeanor and unwavering professionalism, he had earned respect not just from his fellow guards, but also from the people who passed by. On this particular afternoon, the streets were alive with activity. Families strolled along the sidewalks. Couples held hands while admiring the historic buildings, and children giggled as they chased pigeons in the square. It was a peaceful day, filled with laughter and chatter. But amidst the cheerful atmosphere, something darker loomed nearby. Unbeknownst to Corporal Whittaker, trouble was heading straight toward him. Harold Dawson, a man well known in the area for his unpleasant behavior, staggered down the street. His face was flushed, and his breath reeked of alcohol after spending hours at a nearby pub. Harold wasn't just drunk. He was angry at the world. Angry at change, and especially angry at anyone he thought didn't belong. Clutching the leash of his large German shepherd, he muttered under his breath about outsiders ruining the country. To Harold, everyone who looked different or sounded different was an enemy. And today, he had decided to take out his frustrations on someone. As Harold approached the palace gates, his bloodshot eyes landed on Corporal Whittaker. He sneered, muttering insults under his breath. "Look at him," Harold growled to no one in particular, standing there like he owns the place. What Harold didn't know, or perhaps didn't care about, was that Corporal Whittaker was as British as they came. Born and raised in Yorkshire, Whittaker had dedicated years of his life to serving his country. None of that mattered to Harold, though. All he saw was someone he deemed different. The crowd around the gate began to notice Harold's erratic behavior. A few tourists exchanged worried glances, unsure whether to intervene or move away. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, sensing the tension in the air. Meanwhile, Corporal Whittaker remained motionless, his gaze fixed ahead. His training taught him to stay composed, even in uncomfortable situations. But deep inside, he could feel the weight of Harold's piercing glare. Something wasn't right. Harold stopped a few feet away from the gate, swaying slightly as he gripped his dog's leash tighter. His lips curled into a cruel smirk as he sized up Corporal Whittaker. For a moment, it seemed like he might walk away, muttering to himself. But then, fueled by rage and liquid courage, Harold took another step forward. The German shepherd growled low, its hackles rising as it picked up on its owner's hostility. The once peaceful scene was now charged with tension, and everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Little did they know, this encounter would become unforgettable, not because of hatred, but because of the remarkable way it unfolded. Harold Dawson's presence grew more menacing with each passing second. His face twisted into a sneer as he stared at Corporal Whittaker, his words dripping with venom. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" he spat, pointing a shaky finger at the guard. "People like you, coming here and acting all high and mighty." The crowd around them shifted uneasily, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch. Some whispered to each other, while others pulled their children closer, sensing that things were about to escalate. Corporal Whittaker didn't respond. He had been trained for moments like this, to remain calm and composed no matter what. But inside, his mind raced. He could feel the weight of Harold's hatred pressing down on him, yet he refused to let it show. His posture stayed firm, his eyes focused straight ahead, as if Harold weren't even there. This only seemed to infuriate the man further. "Look at him," Harold shouted, his voice slurred but loud enough to draw attention from passers-by. "Thinks he's too good to answer me." He turned to the growing crowd, seeking validation for his anger. "This is what I'm talking about. These people come here, act like they own the place, and were just supposed to sit back and take it. A few people in the crowd exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others shook their heads in disapproval. One elderly woman muttered under her breath, "Leave him alone. He's just doing his job." But Harold wasn't listening. His rage continued to build, feeding off the alcohol in his system and the toxic thoughts swirling in his mind. Without warning, he unclipped the leash from his German shepherd's collar. The dog, already tense and alert, immediately sensed its owner's hostility. It growled low, its sharp teeth bared, as it eyed Corporal Whittaker with predatory intent. The tourists gasped, some stepping back instinctively, while others froze in shock. "Let's see how tough you are now," Harold barked, shoving the dog forward. The German shepherd lunged toward Corporal Whittaker, its powerful body moving with startling speed. For a moment, time seemed to slow down. The crowd collectively held their breath, unsure of what would happen next. Would the guard retaliate? Would he defend himself? Or would he stand there, frozen in fear? Instead of panicking, Corporal Whittaker remained steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. Years of training kicked in, reminding him to stay calm and assess the situation. As the dog circled him, snapping aggressively, he kept his movements deliberate and controlled. His expression never changed, though beads of sweat began to form on his forehead. Despite the chaos unfolding around him, he refused to let Harold's provocation break his resolve. The crowd watched in stunned silence, torn between admiration for Whittaker's composure and fear for his safety. Some tried to record the scene on their phones, capturing every detail for social media. Others called out to Harold, urging him to stop before things got worse. "Control your dog," one man yelled, his voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. "This isn't right." But Harold was beyond reason. His face flushed red with anger. He laughed cruelly as he egged his dog on. "Go get him," he shouted, clapping his hands together. "Show him who's boss." The German shepherd responded with another fierce bark, leaping closer to Whittaker, its sharp teeth inches away from his legs. For a brief moment, it seemed like the situation might spiral completely out of control. Yet through it all, Corporal Whittaker stood firm. His unwavering calmness contrasted sharply with Harold's wild behavior, creating a stark divide between the two men. While Harold thrived on chaos and aggression, Whittaker embodied discipline and restraint. And as the seconds ticked by, it became clear that this confrontation wasn't just about a dog. It was about two very different ways of facing the world. The story of Corporal James Whittaker didn't end with awards or ceremonies. Its true legacy lay in the quiet, everyday moments where people chose kindness over anger because of his example. Over time, his actions became more than just a memory. They evolved into a movement, a reminder that even in the face of hostility, humanity could prevail. It was as if his calmness had planted seeds of hope across the world, sprouting in unexpected places and inspiring ordinary people to do extraordinary things. One such moment occurred months later in a small town hundreds of miles away from London. A young shopkeeper named Sarah found herself confronted by a customer who grew irate over a simple misunderstanding about pricing. The man's voice rose sharply, drawing stares from others in the store. For a brief second, Sarah felt her own temper flare, but then she remembered Whittaker's story. Taking a deep breath, she spoke gently, explaining the situation without raising her voice. To her surprise, the man apologized and left peacefully. Later, reflecting on the encounter, Sarah realized how Whittaker's approach had helped her turn a potentially explosive situation into a positive interaction. "It made me think," she said to a friend, "that staying calm isn't just for ourselves. It changes the other person too." Across the globe, similar stories emerge. In Australia, a teacher used Whittaker's response to Harold Dawson as part of a lesson plan on conflict resolution. Her students, inspired by his composure, started practicing patience during playground disputes. In Canada, a bus driver credited Whittaker's example when he de-escalated a heated argument between passengers using calm words instead of confrontation. Each act, no matter how small, added another brick to the foundation of a kinder, more compassionate society. For Whittaker himself, life continued much as it always had. He remained stationed at Buckingham Palace, standing tall in his ceremonial uniform, while tourists snapped photos and children waved excitedly. But now many visitors approached him not just to admire his discipline, but to thank him personally. Some shared how his story had impacted their lives, how they'd faced challenges at work, school, or home and drawn strength from his example. Others simply wanted to shake his hand, their eyes glistening with gratitude. Though Whittaker never sought fame, he couldn't deny the profound effect his actions had on people. "I'm just one person," he would say humbly. "But if my choices can help someone else make better ones, then it's all worth it." Meanwhile, Harold Dawson's journey toward redemption remained ongoing. While he still struggled with old habits and prejudices, glimpses of progress shone through. At the shelter where he volunteered, he formed tentative friendships with fellow volunteers and staff members. One day, while serving meals to the homeless, a man thanked him warmly, saying, "You're making a difference here." Those simple words lingered in Harold's mind, stirring something unfamiliar yet powerful: pride in doing good. Slowly, he began to see that respect and connection weren't reserved for certain groups. They were available to everyone willing to earn them. Years later, when asked about the incident outside the palace gates, Whittaker smiled softly and shrugged. "It wasn't about me," he insisted. "It was about showing that hate doesn't have to win, that we can rise above it, not by fighting back, but by choosing a different path." His philosophy resonated deeply, transcending borders and cultures. Books were written about his response, speeches quoted his words, and murals painted in public spaces depicted him kneeling beside the German shepherd, a symbol of unity overcoming division. In the end, the power of Corporal Whittaker's actions wasn't measured in headlines or accolades, but in the countless lives touched by his courage. From classrooms to boardrooms, from bustling cities to quiet villages, his story reminded people that true strength lies in restraint, empathy, and unwavering belief in the goodness of humanity. And though he returned to his post each day, as if nothing had changed, the world around him carried forward the lessons he had taught, that even in the darkest moments, light can shine through, one calm choice at a time. The aftermath of the confrontation left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it. As Corporal James Whittaker returned to his post, resuming his vigilant stance by the palace gates, the crowd lingered for a while longer, unwilling to let the moment slip away. Some people approached him cautiously, offering words of gratitude and admiration. "You handled that beautifully," one woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for showing us how to stand up to hate without becoming hateful ourselves." Others simply nodded in respect, their expressions saying more than words ever could. Despite the praise, Whittaker remained humble. He wasn't looking for recognition or applause. He had only done what he believed was right. When asked by reporters later why he hadn't retaliated or shown anger toward Harold Dawson, Whittaker shrugged slightly and replied, "Hatred doesn't deserve my energy. My job is to protect, not just the palace, but the values it represents. Respect, dignity, unity, those are worth defending." News of the incident spread quickly, thanks in part to the countless videos recorded by onlookers. Within hours, clips of the encounter went viral online, sparking conversations across social media platforms. Viewers were captivated not just by the dramatic turn of events, but also by Whittaker's remarkable composure under pressure. Comments poured in from around the world, praising him for his restraint and leadership. "This is what true strength looks like," one user wrote. Another added, "He didn't fight back because he didn't need to." The power of calmness spoke louder than any insult. Meanwhile, authorities began investigating Harold Dawson's behavior. Witnesses willingly came forward, eager to share their accounts of the incident. Many described Dawson as aggressive and intoxicated, emphasizing how his actions had disrupted the peaceful atmosphere near the palace. Police reviewed the footage captured by tourists, which clearly showed Dawson provoking Whitaker and setting his dog loose. This evidence, combined with public outcry, led to Dawson being formally charged with inciting violence and endangering public safety. As the legal process unfolded, the story gained even more attention. Journalists reached out to Corporal Whitaker for interviews, hoping to learn more about the man behind the uniform. But Whitaker politely declined most requests, preferring to stay out of the spotlight. Instead, he focused on his duties, continuing to serve with the same quiet dedication that had earned him so much admiration. "I'm just doing my job," he told those who pressed him. "If anything good comes out of this, I hope it's that people see we can face hatred with kindness and win." In the days that followed, the incident sparked broader discussions about racism and prejudice in society. Community leaders used Whitaker's response as an example of how to confront hostility without escalating it. Schools invited him to speak to students about tolerance, empathy, and standing firm in the face of adversity. Though Whitaker initially hesitated to take on such a public role, he eventually agreed, recognizing the opportunity to inspire positive change. For Harold Dawson, however, the consequences of his actions weighed heavily. News outlets revealed his history of similar offenses, painting a picture of a man whose unchecked anger and biases had caused harm before. While some sympathized with him, arguing that alcohol may have clouded his judgment, others felt he deserved every bit of the backlash he received. The court case against him drew widespread coverage, with many hoping it would send a clear message. Hate has no place in a civilized society. Throughout it all, Corporal Whitaker stayed grounded. He didn't dwell on what had happened or seek revenge against Dawson. Instead, he focused on the lessons that could be learned from the incident. To him, it wasn't about punishing someone for their mistakes. It was about creating a better future where such moments became unnecessary. As he stood guard at the palace gates once again, watching families stroll by and children laugh, he allowed himself a small smile. In a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, he had shown that compassion and courage could still prevail. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough to make a difference. The German Shepherd lunged forward with a ferocious bark, its teeth gleaming in the sunlight as it snapped at Corporal Whitaker's legs. The crowd gasped, some covering their mouths in horror, while others instinctively stepped back. Children clung to their parents, wide-eyed and frightened, unsure of what was going to happen next. For a moment, it seemed like the dog might bite, its powerful jaws just inches away from Whitaker's uniform. Harold Dawson laughed cruelly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Not so brave now, are you?" he taunted, clearly enjoying the chaos he had created. But Corporal Whitaker didn't flinch. His training had prepared him for moments like this, situations where panic could lead to disaster. Instead of reacting impulsively, he took a deep breath, focusing on the animal rather than the man behind it. Dogs, he knew, were often reflections of their owners. If he could calm the dog, maybe he could diffuse the entire situation. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to one knee, keeping his movements smooth and non-threatening. The dog paused, its ears twitching as it locked eyes with Whitaker. Its growls softened slightly, though its body remained tense and alert. Whitaker extended his hand, palm down, toward the animal. His voice was calm and steady, almost soothing, as he began speaking softly. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "It's okay. You're all right." The crowd watched in stunned silence, captivated by the unexpected turn of events. No one moved. Even Harold seemed momentarily frozen, his cruel grin faltering as he realized something extraordinary was happening. To everyone's amazement, the German Shepherd hesitated. It sniffed the air cautiously, its tail wagging ever so slightly as it sensed no threat from Whitaker. Step by step, the dog moved closer until it was standing right in front of him. Another low growl rumbled in its throat, but Whitaker didn't react. He continued speaking in that same gentle tone. maintaining eye contact without showing fear or aggression. After what felt like an eternity, the dog finally sat down beside him, its earlier hostility melting away. It leaned into Whittaker slightly, as if seeking reassurance, completely ignoring Harold's frantic commands to attack again. Harold's face turned red with rage. "Get over here," he shouted, yanking at the leash. But the dog wouldn't budge. It stayed by Whittaker's side, calm and obedient, as if it had found a new leader to trust. The crowd erupted into murmurs of disbelief and admiration. Some people clapped quietly, while others whispered to each other about how incredible Whittaker's actions were. One woman wiped tears from her eyes, overwhelmed by the display of patience and courage. Even those who had been recording the incident on their phones stopped to take in the surreal moment unfolding before them. For Harold, however, the situation was spiraling out of control. His plan to humiliate and intimidate Corporal Whittaker had backfired spectacularly. What was supposed to be a show of dominance had turned into a demonstration of Whittaker's strength. Not physical strength, but emotional and mental resilience. Harold tugged harder on the leash, his frustration mounting. "Come here, you stupid mutt," he yelled, his voice cracking with anger. But the dog only tilted its head, looking confused and unmoved. As the seconds ticked by, Harold's bravado began to crumble. He glanced around nervously, noticing the disapproving stares of the crowd. People shook their heads, some openly condemning his behavior. "Leave him alone," one man called out, his voice firm and unyielding. Others joined in, voicing their support for Whittaker and criticizing Harold's actions. "You should be ashamed of yourself," an older woman added, her tone sharp with indignation. Corporal Whittaker, still kneeling beside the dog, remained silent throughout the exchange. His focus never wavered, not even when Harold stormed closer, trying to regain control of the situation. Yet the damage was done. The crowd had turned against Harold, and his own dog had abandoned him in favor of the calm and composed guard. As the tension reached its peak, it became clear that this confrontation wasn't just about a racist man and his aggressive pet. It was about the power of composure, kindness, and leadership in the face of hatred. And in that moment, Corporal Whittaker emerged not as a victim, but as a symbol of quiet strength. With the German shepherd now sitting calmly by his side, Corporal Whittaker remained on one knee, his demeanor as steady and composed as ever. The crowd, still buzzing with shock and admiration, watched intently to see what would happen next. Harold Dawson, however, was far from finished. His face burned red, not just with embarrassment, but with a simmering rage that he couldn't contain. He yanked at the leash again, trying desperately to reclaim control over his dog, but the animal refused to budge. It stayed firmly planted beside Whittaker, its earlier aggression replaced by an almost serene loyalty. "You think this is some kind of joke?" Harold snarled, his voice trembling with fury. "Get up and fight like a man." But Whittaker didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he slowly stood up, keeping his movements measured and unhurried. His eyes locked onto Harold's for the first time since the confrontation began. There was no anger in Whittaker's gaze, only a quiet authority that seemed to cut through Harold's bluster like a knife. "This isn't bravery," Whittaker said finally, his voice calm but firm, carrying just enough weight to silence the murmurs of the crowd. "This is my duty. And this." He gestured subtly toward the palace behind him, its grandeur standing tall against the London sky. "This is my home, just like it's yours. But you don't get to bring hate here. Not today." The words landed like a punch, leaving Harold momentarily speechless. For all his loud posturing and venomous insults, Harold hadn't expected Whittaker to respond. Not like this. The guard's tone wasn't confrontational or mocking. It was respectful yet unyielding, a verbal shield that deflected Harold's attempts to provoke him further. Some members of the crowd nodded approvingly, while others whispered their agreement. Even Harold's own dog seemed to sense the shift in energy, letting out a soft whimper as if sensing its owner's growing unease. Harold clenched his fists, clearly struggling to find a retort. "Don't lecture me," he snapped, though his voice lacked the confidence it had before. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," Whittaker replied evenly, his posture relaxed but commanding. "I know that hatred doesn't solve anything. It only makes us smaller. Is that really how you want to live?" For a brief moment, there was silence. The tension in the air felt palpable, as though the entire scene had been frozen in time. Then, slowly, the crowd began to react. A few people started clapping softly, their applause tentative at first, but growing louder as others joined in. Someone shouted, "Well said." Another added, "Leave him alone. He's doing his job." The collective disapproval was unmistakable, and Harold, who moments ago had strutted around like he owned the street, suddenly looked small and cornered. Realizing he was losing ground, Harold made one last desperate attempt to assert himself. "Fine," he barked, grabbing the dog's leash with more force than necessary. "Come on, then." The German shepherd hesitated, glancing back at Whittaker as if reluctant to leave. When Harold tugged harder, the dog finally relented, following its owner but casting one last curious look over its shoulder. As they walked away, Harold muttered under his breath. His shoulders hunched and his steps hurried. The crowd parted to let him pass, many glaring at him with undisguised contempt. As soon as Harold disappeared down the street, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The tension evaporated, replaced by a wave of relief and admiration for Corporal Whittaker. People approached him cautiously, thanking him for handling the situation with such grace and dignity. One young boy even stepped forward, holding out a small British flag he'd been waving earlier. "Thank you, sir," he said shyly, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. Whittaker smiled, a rare break in his stoic expression, and knelt down to ruffle the boy's hair. "Just doing my part," he said simply. Though the incident was over, its impact lingered. Tourists continued taking photos, not just of the palace, but also of Whittaker, capturing the moment when composure triumphed over chaos. Social media posts about the encounter began spreading rapidly, turning what could have been a shameful display of racism into a powerful reminder of resilience and humanity. As Whittaker resumed his position at the gate, standing tall once more, he knew that his actions had spoken louder than any insult or slur ever could. In that single act of calm defiance, he had shown everyone present that true strength lies not in fighting fire with fire, but in extinguishing it altogether. The trial of Harold Dawson became a topic of widespread discussion, not just locally but across the country. Courtrooms are often quiet and formal spaces, but this one buzzed with energy as reporters, activists, and curious citizens packed the benches. The judge presided over the case with a stern expression, aware of the weight it carried beyond the legal proceedings. Witnesses were called to testify, each recounting their version of the events outside Buckingham Palace that fateful afternoon. One by one, they painted a vivid picture of Harold's behavior, his slurred insults, his deliberate provocation, and the dangerous decision to unleash his dog on Corporal Whittaker. A young woman who had been visiting London for the first time described how she feared for Whittaker's safety when the German shepherd lunged forward. "It was terrifying," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But what struck me most was how calm Corporal Whittaker stayed. He didn't react with anger or violence. He showed us all what real strength looks like." Harold sat silently at the defendant's table, occasionally shaking his head in frustration or muttering under his breath. His lawyer argued that he had acted impulsively while intoxicated and wasn't in full control of his actions. But the prosecution countered by pointing out Harold's history of similar offenses, presenting evidence of past complaints against him for aggressive and racist behavior. The court listened intently as these details emerged, leaving little room for doubt about the pattern of hostility in Harold's actions. When it came time for Corporal Whittaker to testify, the courtroom fell silent. Dressed in his ceremonial uniform, Whittaker stood tall and composed, answering questions with clarity and humility. He recounted the incident matter-of-factly, never once exaggerating or seeking sympathy. When asked why he hadn't retaliated, he simply replied, "Because hatred doesn't deserve a response. My duty is to uphold peace and respect, not to mirror someone else's anger." His words resonated deeply, not just with those present in the courtroom, but also with people following the trial through news coverage. Social media erupted with praise for Whittaker's poise under pressure. Memes and quotes from his testimony flooded platforms, turning him into an accidental symbol of resilience and grace. People admired not only his physical courage, but also his moral conviction, the unwavering belief that responding to hate with kindness is always the stronger path. In the end, the judge delivered a verdict that reflected both accountability and hope. Harold Dawson was found guilty of inciting violence and endangering public safety. His sentence included mandatory community service, anger management counseling, and a hefty fine. While some felt the punishment was too lenient given the severity of his actions, others saw it as an opportunity for rehabilitation, a chance for Harold to confront his biases and work toward change. After the trial concluded, attention shifted back to Corporal Whittaker. Offers poured in from organizations wanting to honor him for his exemplary conduct during the incident. Local councils proposed ceremonies, schools invited him to speak, and even national figures expressed interest in meeting him. Yet Whittaker remained steadfast in his humility. He accepted a few invitations where he felt his story might inspire others, but declined anything that smacked of self-promotion. "I'm no hero," he told one interviewer. "I did what anyone should do. Stand firm without losing sight of humanity." As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of the incident continued to spread. Teachers used Whittaker's story in classrooms to teach students about conflict resolution and empathy. Community groups organized workshops on combating racism, using the confrontation as a case study in de-escalation. Even strangers reached out to Whittaker via letters and messages, thanking him for reminding them that there is power in staying calm and compassionate, even when faced with ugliness. For Harold Dawson, life after the trial was quieter, but far from easy. News of his conviction followed him wherever he went, making it difficult to escape the consequences of his actions. Some neighbors shunned him, while others tried to engage him in conversations about changing his ways. Whether or not he truly learned from the experience remained uncertain, but the scrutiny forced him to confront his behavior more directly than ever before. Meanwhile, Corporal Whittaker returned to his post at Buckingham Palace, standing guard as he always had. To the tourists snapping photos and waving hello, he appeared unchanged, still the same disciplined figure who embodied dignity and duty. But inside, he knew something profound had shifted. What started as a routine day on the job had transformed into a moment that touched countless lives and reminded everyone watching that even in months had passed since the incident at Buckingham Palace, but its impact continued to resonate far beyond the cobblestone streets of London. Corporal James Whittaker's quiet act of courage had become a beacon of hope in a world often overshadowed by division and hostility. The story of how he faced down hatred with grace and composure inspired countless individuals, sparking conversations about resilience, empathy, and the power of leading by example. In recognition of his actions, Whittaker was awarded a commendation for exemplary conduct, a rare honor reserved for moments of extraordinary professionalism and character. During the ceremony, held within the historic walls of the palace itself, high-ranking officials praised him not just as a soldier but as a role model. Corporal Whittaker reminds us that true strength lies not in force or retaliation, but in restraint and compassion. One officer said during the presentation. As applause filled the room, Whittaker accepted the award with characteristic humility, dedicating it to all those who strive to make their communities better through kindness and understanding. But the accolades didn't stop there. Schools began inviting Whittaker to speak to students, eager to share his story as a lesson in leadership and moral courage. At first, he hesitated, unsure if he was the right person to take on such a visible role. Yet, after seeing how deeply his message resonated with young people, he embraced the opportunity. Standing before classrooms filled with wide-eyed children, he spoke plainly and sincerely. "Life will test you," he told them. "People may try to bring you down with anger or hate. But remember this, you don't have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is stay calm and show respect, even when it's hard." His words struck a chord, especially among teenagers grappling with bullying and peer pressure. Many wrote letters thanking him for giving them tools to handle difficult situations. One student shared how Whittaker's story inspired her to stand up for a classmate being teased, while another admitted he'd stopped retaliating against bullies and instead tried talking things out. These small victories, though seemingly minor, added up to something much bigger, a shift toward greater empathy and understanding. Beyond schools, Whittaker's influence extended into broader society. Community organizations used his response to Harold Dawson's provocation as a blueprint for conflict resolution. Workshops were organized to teach adults and children alike how to de-escalate tense situations without resorting to aggression. Social media campaigns encouraged users to share stories of times they chose kindness over confrontation, tagging posts with #StrengthInCalm, a phrase coined in Whittaker's honor. Even celebrities joined in, amplifying the message and helping it reach millions around the globe. As for Harold Dawson, the months following his sentencing brought mixed results. Publicly disgraced and struggling to find employment, he kept mostly to himself, avoiding eye contact with neighbors who once greeted him warmly. But change, however slow, began to take root. Forced to attend anger management sessions as part of his punishment, Harold reluctantly opened up about the insecurities and fears driving his behavior. His counselor noted progress, albeit gradual. He's starting to see that his actions hurt not only others but also himself, the counselor remarked during a private meeting with authorities. Though Harold still had a long way to go, some members of the community decided to extend an olive branch. The local pastor visited him regularly, offering support and guidance. "Everyone deserves a second chance," the pastor explained when questioned about his outreach. Slowly, Harold started volunteering at a nearby shelter as part of his community service requirement. There, surrounded by people from diverse backgrounds, he began to confront his prejudices head-on. It wasn't easy, and setbacks occurred, but the experience planted seeds of reflection and growth. Back at Buckingham Palace, life returned to normal for Corporal Whittaker, or as close to normal as possible after becoming an international symbol of hope. Tourists continued flocking to see the guards, many specifically asking to meet him. Some brought gifts, handwritten notes, drawings, or flags signed by entire families, as tokens of gratitude. Whittaker accepted them graciously, touched by the outpouring of love and admiration. Yet despite the attention, he remained grounded, focusing on his duties and the values he represented. To him, the real victory wasn't in the awards or recognition, but in the ripple effect of his actions. He knew that every child who learned to respond to bullying with kindness, every adult who chose dialogue over conflict, and every person who stood firm against hatred carried forward the legacy of that day. And in doing so, they proved that even the